Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we are climbing to 2000 ELO, where I'll be trying to explain my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. And we're going to be doing some 10-minute games as we go through the lower ELOs to make the game slightly quicker, so we can probably do several games in one video, as some commenters suggested. So we have d4 c6, and my opponent goes c3. So this is basically like, I don't know, Karo Khan versus Karo Khan. Okay, my opponent goes bishop f4. And, okay, let me just think for a second here. Because normally against, if, for example, my opponent goes bishop f4 in this position, I like to go queen to b6, which I have dubbed the Centurion system. In this position, we can still go queen b6, although queen d2 is a very easy way to defend. Although with queen d2, this knight doesn't have a very natural developing square because, I mean, a3 is kind of a silly square to put it on. So I think I actually do like queen b6. Okay, queen b3. I should have expected that, to be fair. Okay, let's play some... I could go bishop f5, but I want to try to avoid symmetry. Now, you may be asking, why am I not taking the white queen? That would just double white's pawns. That would be wrong, and I guarantee if I take this queen, the position's probably like plus 0.7. It's going to be really, really good for white, because the issue is that although the pawns are doubled, how am I going to exploit that? And also, the open A file is a problem. So I instead allow my opponent to take, and yeah, he can go bishop c7, targeting the b6 pawn if he wants. I can just move the pawn or defend the pawn. And this is probably better for us because we now have vision on the a2 pawn. Now I'm going to go bishop f5, really trying to clamp down on the e4 square to prevent any e4 breaks. And yeah, I think we're probably doing pretty well in this position. And we have very easy development, like knight bd7, pawn e6. We could even go for knight to h5, chasing the dark squared bishop for white. That would be a pretty viable move. And yeah, so from effectively a position of symmetry, I think we've definitely gotten the upper hand by not really doing anything special. And I think in the previous episode, I spoke a lot about how at this sort of rating level, you don't really need to do anything special to win. If you just play normal moves and decent moves consistently, below like 1200, your opponent will probably just self-destruct at some point. So hopefully we can demonstrate that again. Okay, after knight g to f3, now we can consider knight to h5 because the bishop no longer hits. It doesn't hit it anymore, although I do like the look of h6. Yeah, I think I like h6. Just taking away the g5 square from the white pieces, namely the bishop. So if knight h5, there's no bishop to g5. But also, if knight h4, I have a hidey hole on h7. Okay, now I like knight h5. And if bishop back to g3 and take, that's absolutely fine with me. Okay. Let me think a second. If we play take, pawn f6, yeah, bishop c7, that's annoying. So I think we should take this. So we now have the bishop pair, and we have an open A file. Again, we haven't done anything incredibly special. We're just playing decent moves, trying to get rid of white's active pieces, and trying to utilize the open A file, which we, of course, opened with the queen trade. There is still a lot of play left in this position, despite the queens being traded very early on. So, okay, what do we do about this knight? We could take it. And after something like, well, f takes makes the most sense, we can continue our development, bishop e7 castle, and probably play for c5 ideas, which I think I quite like, actually. I quite like that. I'm going to try and play this very, very simply. Very simply. I'm going to go bishop e7. So we have the bishop pair. This bishop has access to h7, so it's perfectly safe. And this is kind of an advanced Karo Khan, right? You can see the sort of pawn structure, which is typical of an advanced Caro-Kann. And this is why understanding pawn structures is very useful, because we can play this as if it was an advanced Caro-Kann, which means c5 is the break. c5 is the pawn break that we're looking for. So let's play it. Pawn c5. I castled because I didn't want bishop b5 to come with a check on my king. That would be annoying. And this is, you know, a very drawable position. And sometimes, particularly with the black pieces, if your opponent looks to just trade a lot of pieces off, there's often not that much you can do about it. But that's where endgames come in, because you want to try to improve your endgames and make it so that you can win in the endgame. So here I'm looking at ideas like pawn c4 and lifting the rook to try to target the weak b2 pawn, particularly because my bishop controls b1, right? I really like that idea. And I'm also, by creating this pawn chain, making it very difficult for this bishop to participate in the game, because we just dominate this light square diagonal so much, right? The only way for white to do it would be to put a rook on c1 and rotate the bishop to c2, which is quite a long-winded plan. The knight also has no access into the position. We control all the dark squares, and the knight retreats because it's got nothing better to do. And I think this is the thing where my opponent, fair play to him, isn't doing anything stupid. He's not just giving me free pieces, right? So I will have to break through the position in some manner. But we have a lot of time to figure out how we want to go about it. So pushing this pawn looks interesting, although I think maybe doubling the rooks on the a file makes a lot of sense to try and make b4 a viable pawn break, because if a takes, then we can win a rook. So I like that. That makes a lot of sense. Let's go rook a5. So we're just going to try and slowly turn up the pressure. Some of you may be looking at bishop g5, applying pressure to the knight. But of course, bishop g5, my opponent can just push f4 with tempo defended by the rook. So if my opponent were to move this rook, let's say, I don't know, to d1, then maybe we consider moves like bishop to g5, because now f4 can't be played. Okay, my opponent looks for a bishop trade. Do we want a bishop trade? Do we want to take this? Well, it wouldn't be ridiculous. You know, I think we have significant pressure after a move like rook to b5. But if we just go bishop d3 with tempo on the rook, then we're going to make white's life very difficult, because we maintain the bishop pair, and white has very limited play. We can go for this rook to b5 idea, for example, and how is white defending? I mean, rook a2 looks like the only move, which it gets the job done, but it's obviously not ideal. I think I'm going to start with pawn b5, which may confuse some of you because I'm taking away the b5 square from the rook. But the reason I'm doing it is because I think the more important thing is trying to play the pawn b4 break. Okay, so my opponent puts the bishop on e2, offering me a trade. Do I want to trade? No, I don't want to trade. Let's retreat the bishop. I chose g6 rather than h7 just because there's no problems with my back rank, because I have the h7 square for the king. Probably an irrelevant detail, but because I'm banking on opening up the a file or the b file at some point to break on the queen side, it is very useful. Just again, small improvements, consistent small improvements. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. Here, bishop g5 looks quite interesting. Pinning the knight to the rook, kind of forcing the move rook to d1, and then we can go bishop c2. Right? Hitting the rook. And that looks completely winning. Now, rook to a8 followed by pawn to b4 is also completely viable. Completely viable idea. But this is what I mean in terms of letting your opponent make a mistake. Now, did white hang a piece? No, he hasn't just hung a piece. He hasn't given us a piece like in the previous episode that happened in one of the games. several moves in a row, actually. um, but tactically, white is now lost, and he resigns because of it. So yeah, that was a very interesting game. The reason he resigns is because after bishop to g5, there's no pawn f4 blocking the attack. There's no rook c2 because my bishop controls that square. Again, this is the power of the bishop pair. And after rook d1 only move to defend the knight, I have bishop to c2, hitting the rook. The rook, I mean, it can go to c1, right? And that kind of forces my bishop to retreat, because if I take and take, I mean, white is okay. So after I retreat the bishop, white can effectively repeat the position. So I think it's safe to say that was a bit of a premature resignation, right? Bit of a premature resignation, but okay, let's just jump into a quick game analysis, and then we'll hop into a second game.
Nice win. Let's review it together.
82.8% accuracy for my opponent, 86.8 for us. Again, my opponent plays this sort of mirror Caro-Kann position. I go queen 2 b6. Engine likes bishop f5, but I don't want symmetry. Queen b3. Now watch the eval bar. Watch. Oh, you can't see the eval bar. Wait, let me change the board. Okay, now you can see it. So watch the eval bar. It's currently plus 0.15. If we take this queen, this goes all the way up to almost 0.5, 0.6 even. That is a lot. That is a lot. And after white takes us, we're better with the black pieces on move 5, right? Because the doubled pawns are irrelevant. It doesn't matter. How are you going to exploit them? If bishop c7, just knight to d7 or pawn to b5, and you're wasting your time. This is good pressure. So my opponent develops, I also develop. We just slowly improving the position. Pawn h6, giving our bishop a way out. Castles knight h5. Engine prefers pawn b5. Probably playing for b4, which I also consider to be a possibility. Knight e5 is already giving the game to me somewhat. Now, the engine doesn't like me taking on e5, but I personally thought that this endgame was very easy for us to play, and we had a clear plan of action. With the open A file, it was clear that pushing the B pawn pushing the B pawn or pushing the C pawn or pushing the B and C pawns was going to be the way to break open the white position. And although it didn't completely manifest, like, it was very difficult for white to make any moves, and offering me bishop trades wasn't gonna last. The engine here likes rook b5. Rook a2 is the only move to defend, and here it wants bishop back to g6. So I can't really explain that to you. I thought b5 was viable. After bishop e2, engine wants take in the immediate b4, which honestly I should have given more consideration to. I think I forgot the fact the rook would no longer be defending the a rook. So if bishop takes, you can't take because of this. And yeah, although the material is equal, let's say well, you can't even do that. What does white play? Let's say knight f3. We can push b5. This still can't be taken. The rook can't go to e1 because the bishop controls e1. Let's say rook b1. The bishop retreats. And we're going to create chaos on the queen side. I mean, what does white do? Like rook c2, rook b8, rook c3, b4, take, bishop takes, rook retreats, rook a2, and we just have so much pressure. And d4 could be a major weakness in the future. We retreat the bishop, though. Engine thinks it's equal. Rook ec1 is a mistake because of bishop g5. The thing is, though, after rook d1, bishop c2, rook dc1, taking is no good. This is just an opposite color bishop endgame, and the engine actually prefers the white pieces here, interestingly. So I couldn't really see anything better than just retreating the bishop. And after rook back to d1, I'll have to find a different plan of action. I'm a bit confused because the engine again wants this. Then it suggests bishop a4. Oh, bishop a4 is a lovely move. Okay, had we actually played the position out in the game, maybe I would have seen that. I hope so. Maybe that's what my opponent saw. But now there's no rook d1 because I just take. So the best move is to just give up the exchange and try and play this position. Basically, white has to keep all the files shut to keep my rooks out the game. But I can probably open it up with a move like f6. That'd be the easiest. But yeah, my opponent resigns, and let's jump into the second game. Alright, so we have the white pieces, pawn e4, pawn e5, and of course, we are going to play the Vienna game with knight to c3. The Vienna is an opening I love. I've got a whole video guide available on my channel if you want to check that out to learn the Vienna for yourself, as well as a full playlist of Vienna games. And the Vienna confuses a lot of people, particularly below sort of 1600 level, because, I mean, everybody plays knight f3 or bishop c4 or f4, I think. I mean, I guess some people will also play d4, going for the gambit lines. But knight c3 is a great option, and I still play it over the board above 2000 elo with pretty good success. I think my best result in the Vienna was against like a 2250, where I won in like 20 moves, maybe less, which is nuts. But okay, my opponent goes knight c6, the Max Lang defense, and after bishop c4, which realizes the plan of the Vienna of controlling d5, playing d3, and going f4 before developing the knight to f3. That's the whole point. Black can already get into very deep trouble if he goes for bishop c5, which is the most common move in this position and the most natural move, just copying what white is doing. Better is something like knight to f6, which is the main line, which my opponent goes for. And we will continue with pawn d3, looking to play pawn to f4, knight f3, castles, all of that fun. Now, the best move here for black is knight a5, chasing our bishop. And then I personally like bishop a3, knight takes, a takes, opening up the a file. Very, very similar to the previous game with the queen trade on b6, where the doubled pawns aren't a big deal. It's actually quite good for the side with the open rook. But okay, my opponent goes h6, which a lot of people play, trying to stop bishop g5, knight d5 ideas. It doesn't really do anything. We can just continue with the plan of f4 now, and black is kind of wasting his time. There are interesting lines where instead of h6, bishop c5, I think it's like f4, pawn d6, knight f3, bishop g4. That's a very important line. And all of those are in my full Vienna course video. So again, check that out if you want to learn more. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to play the Vienna. It's very malleable. There's a lot you can do with it. And there'll be a lot that your opponents won't have seen before or ever really studied before, which is very different from something like the Italian game or the Roy Lopez or something like that. Okay, bishop c5. Let me think a second. Yeah, okay, knight f3 should be fine. One thing we have to be aware of in these positions is that because we've committed to the move f4, there is no castling for the time being, because this bishop obviously controls the g1 square, and you can't castle into a check. However, we can do stuff about this bishop, like knight to a4, for example, the reverse of my opponent's knight to a5 plan, after I played pawn d3 in this position, which I have faced a lot online. It's one of the better lines. Now, after pawn to d6, we do have to be somewhat careful. Now, black has kind of wasted a tempo with pawn h6, but there are certain lines where we go knight g5, going after f7. So h6 does stop those lines, so we do have to be aware of that. However, if pawn d6, I think we can just go knight to a4, chasing the bishop, and we should be absolutely fine. Let's say bishop to b6, take, we can castle, and black can actually fall for some traps with bishop g4 ideas. So okay, let's go knight a4, hitting the bishop, and now we don't have to be concerned about knight g4, knight f2 ideas, because this h6 move has kind of wasted a tempo for black. So that's good for us. So, okay, we also can consider moves like pawn f5, which look a bit strange because it takes the pressure off of the center, but very similar to what we did in the previous game with dominating the light square diagonal with the black pieces. It does the exact same thing in this position, where the pawns and the bishop work together to lock this bishop out of the game, right? Again, very similar to last game. But okay, bishop b4, essentially forcing pawn c3, because we have to block the check with tempo. I don't think this really helps black in any way, because we just take space. The bishop is still going to be lost, regardless. We can consider pawn b5, actually. After knight a5, we can try and grab a pawn, but it feels short-sighted, because if my opponent takes on c4, then we will be losing the e4 pawn, because the d pawn is overloaded. So let's not do that. Let's just grab this, and I think we should just follow by castling. Or continue by castling, sorry. And again, like in the previous game, there's quite a few themes being repeated here. Black doubles his b-pawns, but he has the open file for the rook, which can be quite nice. Okay, after my opponent castles, I think pawn to f5 makes a lot of sense. Locking this light squared bishop out of the game completely. There is no pawn g6 trying to break open the position, because the f-pawn is pinned to the king, right? And my opponent can go for the d5 break, which is probably the best idea. Yeah, he does go for it. He does go for it. Maybe I shouldn't have allowed that. I don't think it's a massive deal, though. After we take, and my opponent takes, I was calculating queen to b3. Just applying a ton of pressure on this diagonal. So there's no time for taking the f5 pawn. And with all these open lines against the black king, I figured we must have something. We must have something. I don't know, maybe this knight can... Well, no, that just hangs this pawn. And then if I get d4 in, that looks really bad for black. Okay. Okay, knight back to f6, that makes a lot of sense. Now he's actually threatening to take the f-pawn. Yeah. Is it a big deal? I don't know. I don't know. I could play this fancy knight to h4 move defending, which does line the knight up with the queen, but this knight is in the way, of course. If knight h4, knight g4, I could go knight g6, because the f-pawn is pinned, remember. Rook e8, and then I can take with a fork. That looks really cool. And this is just a threat regardless. That just wins an exchange. Okay, let's go over it. Let's go for it. Knight h4, which also opens up my rook to defend the f5 pawn. A lot of you may be concerned about putting the knight on h4 because of the fact the queen is lined up with it, which is a perfectly reasonable concern. But this knight can't move with any significant threat. Like, let's say the knight comes back to d5. I mean, the knight is just hanging. But we can also play knight g6 first with tempo. And, I don't know, maybe because the knight blocks the diagonal, there's some interesting ideas. Like, knight d5, knight g6, fg6, bishop d5 check, king h8, take. I mean, we win a pawn in that line. And we also have a pawn on g6, which is just very powerful. So, yeah, we can also go bishop to e4, defending d3, defending g6. That looks quite nice. That looks quite nice. I like that. So that looks pretty good. You always have to be careful when your queen and bishop are formed up in a battery like this on b3 and c4, that there is no knight to a5 with a fork. Here, of course, that doesn't exist because my b-pawn is controlling the a5 square. But if this pawn were back on b2, then knight to a5 would be a major concern, because we don't want to be giving up what I would say is maybe our best piece. Maybe our best piece. If my opponent moves his king to try to disallow knight g6, because then the f pawn can take, well, then obviously we can just grab the f7 pawn. And if my opponent grabs on d3, then we can go knight g6 check. And as you may be able to quite easily tell, that would be really bad for black. Obviously, we also need to consider queen d4. That's like the first geometric thing you should be looking at, but it doesn't work, obviously, because of the c-pawn. Okay, knight e7. That's a strong move, which I thought he might go for. Hitting f5 and defending the g6 square. Now, the question is, though, does it actually stop us from playing knight g6? Does it? When a move looks impossible, but it can be played, normally it's really good, if that makes sense. So in this position, black is obviously trying really hard to stop knight g6. So if we can still play it, it's probably going to be good. Now, what does knight g6 accomplish? Well, it attacks the rook. If the rook moves, bishop f7, and we win an exchange, which is great. If knight g6 and knight g6 and fg6, well, the f-pawn can't move, and we're going to take it. So that looks pretty damn good to me. So I see no reason not to go knight g6, which is a very cool looking move, right? Like completely surrounded by the black pieces, just throwing the knight onto the g6 square is a very gangster looking move. Now, knight g6 is strong because it actually delivers a threat. If we were just putting the knight on g6, then it wouldn't matter. But it actually threatens to win the rook, or the exchange, which we should now grab. I mean, in theory, we could have waited and done something else, but I don't really see a need to. So, okay, this knight is defended by the bishop. We are up in exchange, down a pawn. That is the material trade-off. But obviously, that should be better for us. Now, how should we continue this? Bishop d2, rook e8 looks very natural. Getting the rooks on the open files. I don't think our dark square bishop has a better square. b2 looks very sad and allows knight to e3 with annoying forks. If this knight moves, we do have bishop h6, gh6, and rook to f6, overloading the g-pawn. So that's a very nice idea. So let's go bishop d2. How does black play this? Okay, c6. Doesn't really... Oh, I suppose he's trying to go b5. Okay, that's actually a nice idea. b5 traps my bishop. Okay. Okay, how should we deal with that? We could go b5 ourselves. And if take, queen takes, this is compromised, this is compromised. If b5, my opponent can give a check on c5 with the queen, though, which is slightly annoying, I think. We can also go pawn a4, stopping pawn b5, which I think I prefer massively, because it's a more active move than trying to... Like, for example, the other things I was considering was like queen b2. So if b5, I can drop the bishop back. But that's way more passive. I want to try to remain as active as possible, which is just a good rule of thumb in general. Piece activity is very important. So by playing a4, we're just taking space and by proxy defending our bishop. Now we also don't have to be concerned about the queen coming to c5 with check, which is obviously a bonus. We don't have to worry about the d3 pawn because it's still well defended. If my opponent goes for a move like knight to d6, hitting the bishop, well, there should be something very obvious coming to your mind that I previously mentioned, which is bishop takes h6, gh6, and rook f6, winning a pawn and applying a ton of pressure to the f7 square. Okay, queen e7, taking that possibility away because the knight will be defended by the queen. Maybe he's trying to play pawn e4 as well. So I'm quite tempted to go rook 8 to e1. which was the intended plan initially. Getting the rook on the e-file, hitting the pawn. The pressure on f7 isn't going anywhere, and the only way to really relieve it is to get rid of this bishop. Now, if that's done through bishop e6, I'll of course happily trade and ruin black's structure. That's not a problem with me. And if knight d6, which is the more natural approach, I thought I had pawn d4. Because if pawn e4, well, that's a big target. It's a passed pawn, but it doesn't actually pose a threat. It's more of a target than anything else. And it also gives my bishop access to f4, which is a very, very nice square, hitting the knight and also having the possibility to come to e5 with a lot of pressure. Okay, let's consider this position. Yeah, let's do it. Bishop f4. It may be tempting to drop this bishop back so that it can't be taken, but that just grants black a lot of play after bishop e6 with tempo on my queen. It's unnecessary. Also e3, forcing my bishop back to c1. I don't want any of that. So I'm not fussed about this trade. You know, I could even give him the a4 pawn. Or allow bishop e6 with tempo on the queen. But the thing is, we are up an exchange, so I'm not that bothered. Okay. Bishop e5 looks incredibly strong. We could go queen b3 first, which I think I prefer. Just hitting the rook and either forcing pawn b5, defending the rook, or kicking the rook back. Just getting it out of my territory and controlling a3. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Now let's go bishop e5. Asking a big question of this knight. Whether it wants to allow me to double the pawns or not. Also, we have a lot of pressure on e4 now. We could play something like take and pawn d5, trying to crack open the position and bring our rooks into the game very quickly. My opponent's also getting lower on time. But to be fair to my opponent, he's playing a very decent game of chess. Very decent game of chess. He's not giving me any easy wins or anything like that. He's making me really work for this. And yeah, I suppose... Oh, okay, knight to d5. I didn't think this was that good. Although, if rook e4, then maybe pawn f6. And perhaps my bishop is pinned to my rook. That's interesting. Okay, okay. What else can we do? c4 is an interesting move, because if take it hangs the rook. But the problem with c4 is something like rook takes b4. Although if rook takes b4, queen to g3 threatening mate, there's no knight to f6 because take and the pawn is pinned. So c4, rook takes queen here, the knight is hanging and mate is hanging. If c4, queen takes, if I take the knight, then I lose my queen. If I take here, then knight takes. Yeah, that's a nice line for black. Okay, maybe it's easier just to go rook a1 and challenge his rook. Perhaps that's the easiest game plan. An interesting position. Very interesting. Maybe it's just queen c2, posing a simple threat. And if pawn f5... then I don't know. How do I break through that? Unsure. Okay. I think it makes sense to try and utilize the A file. If here, I suppose I just attack the knight. Okay, let's go over K1. I think we need to try to trade pieces because the fewer pieces on the board, probably the easier to win. Because black has significant weaknesses, which currently I can't do anything about, but I should be able to in the future. And also consider the time situation, where we do get 5 seconds bonus time every move, just due to what the time format is. But black is under a minute, and we have 3 minutes plus increment. I'm not really concerned about this pawn. I mean, if f6, bishop g3, and he pushes the pawn, I mean, this is well defended. Okay. Looking for discoveries. There's not actually any good discoveries, but, you know. Queen c2 looks perfectly reasonable. I can also give a check on a8, but the king just hides on h7. I have no good follow-up. So I shouldn't just play the move for no reason. Let's go queen c2. If bishop f5, I have to be aware of c3. Bishop f... Sorry, pawn f6. Okay. Well, let's drop the bishop back then, ensuring that e1 is well defended. Okay, pawn f5. As expected. Maybe pawn f4 is a concern. This is a very strong knight on d5, I have to say. Very strong knight. Perhaps rook to f1 needs to be played. To stop pawn to f4. Although I could move the bishop. I could just put it back here, actually. So if f4, I can just nab this. I suppose it also just puts good pressure on g7. And yeah, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, okay. Queen to g5? Sure. Does it pose a threat? Suppose going after g2 could be annoying. If rook f1, I get hit with knight to e3 with a fork. That's not fun. I could offer a queen trade. But maybe that encourages him to push because e4 wouldn't be hanging. No, black is playing very well. Playing very well. Rook a7 is interesting. Knight here. Queen d2. And I'm trying to go for these targets. That makes a lot of sense. Pawn e3. Rook b7. Yeah. Okay, let's do it. I don't want to play too defensively. Because that feels like a recipe for disaster. I think I need to be aggressive here. Okay, knight e3. As expected. I thought I could just go queen to d2. There's no discovered checks. The whole idea of queen d2 is that this looks very risky. But I don't think it is, because the knight can't move with check. So we can go for these attacking ideas, but rook to b7 is a big problem. Because this is a major threat. And I'm not really sure Oh, there is bishop f7. Another good find. Again, completely missed that. I don't know. I don't know. King f2 doesn't make... Oh, I've just hung that. Oh, that was really silly. I've just hung mate. Wow. I mean, fair enough. I just got way too low on time. Way too low on time. I mean, what should I have done here? I was also considering queen f2, but I think I'm just lost. Well, apparently this is equal, which is insane. Obviously, I hung mate in 2. I was trying to stop f3. That was the idea. I thought maybe something like this. Maybe I can go for queen takes. Engine thinks this is a draw. Check here. Check. Can I not just run? Apparently I get mated if I run. Oh, he can just... Wow. My extra pieces mean nothing. That's crazy. That's crazy. Okay, I have to say, that was a bit silly of me to actually play that game, because this guy this is his first game on his account, so I probably should have aborted that game. You can just click on the thing, and it says joined 30 minutes ago, so normally I would click on that and then abort the game if an account was created that recently. But yeah, that was kind of silly of me. But anyway, it was an interesting game. I'm not saying my opponent cheated. I just think he's far better than 1000 rating based on his play. But yeah, so we have this Vienna, and I thought we got a very nice position out of the opening. Bishop b4 confused me, I have to say, because it just allowed us to take space. After castles, f5, d5 was definitely the way to go. Queen b3 the engine doesn't like. It wants me to trade on d5, which baffles me. And then go f6. Oh, right. Because if takes, we take on h6. Oh, that's really cool. I was looking for f6 quite a lot around this point of the game, but I didn't consider just trading the bishop for the knight and then doing it. But okay, queen b3, knight back to f6. Knight h4 is a mistake due to b5. That's an insane move. Can you see why? Can you see why? It's knight d4, forking. And if I take, then queen d4 with a massive fork on everything. Taking on a1, and I'm down an exchange. I can still go knight g6, but after... Sorry, not rook e8. Rook d8. I'm not taking on f7 anymore. I can give a check, king f8, and if I return, then my opponent can, of course, take, and I have no particularly good play. Although, in fairness, the only way to stop mate well is to take on a2 with the queen. Knight e7, though. Knight g6. Knight f5 is a mistake. The only move, again, is b5, which, again, is a ridiculous move to find. That's insane. What is going on? Queen d5, queen d5, c d5, knight f7, king f7. And I am up. What am I up? An exchange? Wait. No, I have a rook and 3 pawns for 2 knights. My opponent went knight f5. Knight f8, queen f8, and bishop d2 is a mistake because of b5 again. And if I take c6 and b5 and my bishop is trapped. My opponent went c6. I went a4, stopping the idea altogether. Queen e7, rook a to e1, knight d6. Pawn d4 is wrong. No way. Oh, I completely missed this. Because the pawn is just pinned. And if e4... Bishop g3. Okay. I went d4. e4, bishop f4. And I have to take. Black is better. I assumed I should be fine in this position. But from here, I couldn't really figure out what to do. I considered rook e4. I was concerned about f6, although the engine thinks that c4 is really strong. After queen takes, knight takes. Bishop d6, if take. And I just win the bishop. Rook a1 is a mistake. No way. f6, bishop g3, f5, bishop back to e5. Black is better. And I tried to create counterplay. Queen d2 is the only move to hold this position, which I was very happy to have found. After f4, rook b7, bishop f7, I have to just play rook c7, allow f3, play rook c8, and just repeat. Oh, wow. If the bishop moves, then I take. And if you defend, I just give a check. And if the queen defends, then I sack the rook, and I take here. So black would have to find knight c4, forking the pieces. After queen c2, queen f7, queen e4, check, king back, gf3. I'm up a pawn, but the game is drawn. I blundered mate in 2, though, in panic. I wonder what rating my opponent was. Please, let me know down in the comments what rating you think my opponent actually was, because obviously it was his first game on his account, so I have no idea. But he was a strong player. Fair play. That was a very, very nice attack. Okay, let's jump into our third and final game. My opponent has at least been playing for 6 months, so that's fine. We have another Vienna. G6, okay. That's interesting. We can just go for the Vienna setup. G6 is a very strange way of approaching this position. We can basically do whatever we want here, and we'll probably just go for the Vienna setup. Knight f6, okay. Let's go f4. Just applying pressure to the black center. Black isn't doing anything necessarily wrong, but it's just an odd way of going about the position with the fianchettoed bishop. Okay, let's go knight to f3. We don't really want to take here because after knight takes with tempo on the bishop. I mean, why? Why are we allowing that? Okay, we can actually try and set a trap after we castle. Because bishop g4 could lead to some trappy lines, which we would love to see. Hopefully my opponent goes for it. No, okay, he castles. Alright then, that's fine. Black could be getting into trouble, though. Because of bishop g5 ideas. Could get himself into trouble. Should I start with this? Bishop g4, pawn h3, take, knight d5. Okay. If we play take, bishop g5, I think he can go h6. And he gets away with the weak knight. Okay, let's go king h1. Let's go king h1. Okay, bishop g4. Okay, h3 looks very nice. Yeah, I don't see a reason not to play h3. Because the bishop, of course, can't retreat because it gets trapped. And I don't think black has sufficient counterplay to be sacrificing. So let's go queen takes. And knight d4 is met with queen f2. Making sure c2 is defended. And yeah, this knight can be kicked out with c3 at an appropriate moment. But yeah, we have ideas of taking with attacks on the knight, bishop g5, that kind of thing. And this pin can become incredibly deadly. And I think this just allows it. Yeah. Wait a second. After take bishop g5, is knight g4 playable? Bishop g5, knight g4. If take, 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 take. Rook f1, pressuring f7. Huh. So if here. Take is obviously bad. That's crazy. Can he get away with that? Wait, though. If here, I think I have queen f7, which is a kind of crazy move. But if rook f7, bishop f7, king h8, bishop takes, rook takes, I think I'm completely winning. That's a crazy move, but it's basically a desperado for the queen, which is very rarely something that happens. But yeah, knight g5, I think queen f7 is the winning move. Bit of a queen sacrifice. This has been a really weird episode, honestly. That previous game, yeah, like I said, I really should have checked his account because I'm not really gonna want to play anyone with so few, well, no games. Okay, well, obviously that gives us the knight, so that makes things far easier. I'll show you the line that I'm on about after the game because it's very cool, and I think I calculated it correctly. I'll show you how I came to the conclusion as well as some of the other lines that I was looking at. But yeah, here we're just going to go up a piece, which, you know, opening the F file in the Vienna after playing F4 is one of the key ideas, particularly against the fianchetto setup. It's a very useful idea to know. My opponent can take on C2. I don't really care. It doesn't do anything. We can be cheeky and go knight to d5. Because if he takes the rook, I can go knight to e7, forcing him to sacrifice the queen, because his king has no moves. That's a very cool line. We actually had a very similar thing, I think. Was it not the previous episode? It might have been the climb to 2200, one of the recent videos in that series, where we had a similar thing with knight e7 check, controlling this diagonal of the king, forcing a queen sacrifice. I think that was in the road to 2200. Okay, rook here. I think queen f7 is a very cool queen sack. The take taken, knight to f6 check. King here. Take, take, and take. Yeah, I think we can go for that. That's quite cool. Queen f7 check. If queen f7, knight to f6 check. Of course, the queen can't take it because it's pinned. That's the point. If king f8, can we just set up a windmill with like knight h7 check? Because the queen is pinned by the rook. Okay. Yeah, well, now I can just take on f7. If he takes here, I can take here. If rook to f8, that's more interesting. And he does play it. Rook c1, knight e3. Huh. Knight d5. I don't think works because of take, rook takes, and king g7. And my bishop is pinned to the rook. What else can I go for? The problem is that my rook is overloaded. That's the issue. So for example, if I were to move this bishop after knight a1, if I take back, then he takes here and I'm down in exchange. If knight d7, knight a1, knight takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes. I probably have to go king g1, and I think material is equal. Yeah, which I don't really want. Okay, maybe I've overcomplicated this. Have I? Let me think. Okay, what about rook c1, knight e3, rook f3? Well, then he just takes. And if take, 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 I'm up a pawn there. I really got too fancy with this. I got way too fancy. I did not need to sack the queen on f7 like this. I could have just taken my extra piece with rook c1. Or played a move like queen g5, threatening knight f6 check. That's what I should have done. Okay. Okay. Here. No. Maybe knight e3, trapping the knight. Because I control c2. Maybe that's the way to do it. I'm not convinced, though. Knight here. Take. Take. And I'm just in like king g1. Yeah, it doesn't really work, does it? Doesn't really work. This was a very silly plan, I have to say. I think rook c1 is the best try. I think that's the best try. Yep. Okay, I think rook f3 is the best option. I mean, I can go into a somewhat favorable endgame, but it's certainly not being a piece up, which I should have been. I was just being an idiot. Ah. Yeah, and that's the issue. That's the issue. I don't have to take this knight just yet. I think rook c5 makes more sense. Because this knight doesn't have any moves anyway. It's stuck. But I can take it whenever I want. And it does have a Desperado on g2, though. Knight g2. King g2, rook here. Here. I mean, you can go to d1, but, like, is that not just wasting time? Attacking b2. b3 doesn't seem to make sense. I think rook e5. If knight b2... Yeah, he does go for it. I thought we had very nice winning chances because of our connected passed pawns here. Although maybe my rook's overloaded. Maybe rook d5 is a nice move. preparing to push the e-pawn and defending d3. So if rook to f8, I can go pawn to e5, cementing my knight, and I can support it with pawn d4, king g7. Looking for tactics, like take rook here, but it doesn't do anything. Let's just go e5, defending the knight. I can't be trusted with tactics anymore. That much is clear. Okay. This knight is still kind of out of the game. Can't really do anything. To be fair, it's very close to trapped. Here. Well, no, the knight actually has escapes on a4. So, yeah, there's too many squares to control. Although rook d4 would control this, and this. And I can go rook f1, rook b1. But the knight could try and escape via d1. That is not a threat. And he's also giving me the rook with check, which I only just noticed. Oh my god, what is this game? This is the dumbest game ever. We've both made some ridiculous moves. Okay, let's just retreat the knight. Let's just make this simple. Complication is not what we need now. This is defended. Now this is defended, and this is defended. All the pieces protect each other in a lovely little family. Chess is such a cool game, especially when you're winning, finally. I still can't believe that I just sacked my queen on f7 for no reason. I don't know why I did that. I just completely missed king h8, which is a great resource, I think. Okay, let's give a check. The king steps back. Can give another check. And then I guess I can just push. And the king can't advance forwards. We are controlling all the squares in front of it. And we are controlling d8, so it can go to f8, but the threat is just pawn e7, followed by rook d8 check and promotion. Okay, that's a free knight. Let's grab that. And my opponent resigns. Okay, that was a silly game. A silly, silly game. Let's analyze it anyway. Okay, so 85.5% accuracy for us, 72.9 for my opponent. We did actually play a brilliant move at some point. Okay, we have a Vienna, pretty standard. My opponent goes for a Fianchetto setup, but we're just going to play pretty much the same thing. Take knight d4. The engine prefers the black position, but not after c5. It wants knight h5. And after f5, c6. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, take. Bishop e3. Queen e7. Pawn a4. Okay. I've got to be honest, I like the white position. I do. I like it. But c5 is a mistake because of bishop g5. Now, what I was calculating was knight to g4. I thought this was very interesting, because if I take on d8, after take, I can go rook a to f1, rook d7 defending, and we're better, but not by a significant margin. I was also considering after knight g4, if we play take and take, then we're worse. So what do we do? Well, I was going to go queen f7, which is the best move. Because after rook f7, bishop f7, king h8, bishop d8, rook d8, we take on g5, and we're up, like, what? A rook? So that would have been quite nice. I mean, black can play knight c2, but that's about the end of it. Knight e3. Engine suggests g5. But rook f3 is obviously more natural. Yeah. But okay, queen d7. We nab the free piece. Take. Knight c2. Knight d5 is the best move. Okay, that's what it thinks is brilliant. Point is, if this, then knight e7 check, and the queen has to be sacrificed. After rook fe8, queen f7 was not necessary. I could have just retreated. And this would have been a very easy fork. So you'd have to stop it, and then I just take, and then I'm up 2 pieces. But after queen f7, knight f6 check is another mistake. I should go rook f7, king f7. Oh, and then there's pretty cool move, knight b4 check, discovered check. And then I take the knight, and I have 2 pieces for the rook, which is completely winning because my knight is way too powerful, and my bishop. But knight f6 check, I completely missed king h8. I thought he was going to go king g7. Although this is no good because of queen e8, which I... Okay. Best is knight h5 check. And after gh5, rook f7, king h8, rook a to f1. I'm up no material, but I've got way too much pressure. If king to f8, then I thought I would just go knight h7. And if the king moves, then rook takes and game over. But after king h8, bishop f7, rook f8, I found the only good move, followed by... Yeah, so the problem was that everything is bad. If I try knight d7 counterattacking, then after knight a1, knight f8, rook a1, rook f7, the material's equal. King g1 stopping the infiltration. I don't know, rook d7, rook d1, I have nothing. I mean, if anything, black is slightly better. So, rook ac1 is the only move. Now, if take, I can take. And if this, I can go rook f2. And if king here, knight e8 check is the key ingredient. Because if rook takes, I can take the rook. I was also thinking I could bail out with a move like rook c5. Because after rook f6, rook f6, rook f6, I have rook e5. And I'm up 2 pawns. And that should be enough to win. Even if rook f2 is played, check here, check. And I'm winning way too much. And of course, if you trade the rooks, that's completely game over. But knight e3, rook f3, rook f7, rook c5, and I figured that I should have enough material to win this, which I do. Obviously, my opponent gives me his rook, which he didn't need to do. But let's say he were to have gone rook f8. This is kind of easy. I mean, obviously, I can't hang the knight, but I don't know, d4, knight c4, rook c5, knight b6, pawn d5, and I kind of just pushed the d-pawn. And there's not a whole lot black can do about it. So that was the plan. My opponent gives me the rook, and then the cleanup is relatively easy from there. So yeah, that was a very silly episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, please let me know what rating you think that second opponent was, because I'm not saying he cheated, because I don't think he did. But that was an insane comeback from him. That was nuts. That was nuts. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, as well as series 1 and 2, then check out the playlist down there. And if you want to see a bit of a higher level game, as in like 2000 plus, then check out the video up there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.